Imagine waking up tomorrow and there's no one around. No friends, no family, no co-workers, not even a stranger passing by on the street. No conversations, no laughter, no eye contact, just silence. At first, you might think it sounds peaceful, a break from the chaos of everyday life. But as the hours turn into days and the days into weeks, something inside you starts to shift. That calm isolation slowly becomes something heavier, something deeply unsettling. This is where psychology steps in to explain what really happens to the human brain when it's cut off from social contact. Humans are inherently social beings. From an evolutionary standpoint, we survived not because we were the strongest or fastest species, but because we lived and cooperated in groups. Our brains evolved to connect, to understand others, to belong. So when we remove social contact, when the brain no longer receives interaction, empathy or communication, it begins to malfunction in ways that are both fascinating and terrifying. Dr. Terry Kupers, a psychiatrist who has studied solitary confinement extensively, describes how isolation affects not just the mind, but the very structure and function of the brain itself. When people are deprived of social interaction, the first noticeable change occurs in the brain's stress systems. Normally, when we interact with others, especially people we trust, our brain releases oxytocin, a hormone that promotes feelings of safety and bonding. But in isolation, that process stops. Instead, the stress hormone cortisol takes over. Cortisol is useful in short bursts. It helps us stay alert in danger. But chronic cortisol exposure is toxic to the brain. It damages neurons, especially in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and emotional regulation. That's why people in isolation often report memory loss, confusion, and emotional numbness. Terry Kupers explains that the brain, deprived of external stimuli and social validation, starts to turn inward. This inward focus may begin as self-reflection, but over time it can evolve into rumination, a repetitive cycle of negative thoughts. When there's no one to talk to, no one to provide feedback or perspective, thoughts begin to echo in an empty mental room. Every fear, regret and insecurity grows louder. Psychologically, this can lead to anxiety, depression, and in extreme cases, hallucinations. One of the most disturbing effects of prolonged isolation is sensory deprivation. Our brains are constantly hungry for stimulation. Sounds, sights, touch, conversation. When deprived of this input, the brain starts creating its own. People begin to hear voices, see things that aren't there, or feel sensations that have no source. It's the brain's desperate attempt to fill the void. Studies on prisoners held in solitary confinement show that even after short periods of isolation, individuals experience vivid hallucinations, paranoia, and a distorted sense of time. Hours feel like days. Days feel endless. This distortion of time happens because social cues, like conversations, sunlight patterns, or daily routines, help us regulate our internal clocks. Without these, the brain loses its anchor. Some people report sleeping for hours without realizing it. Others stay awake for days, unable to tell night from day. Kupers found that this temporal disorientation contributes to a sense of unreality, where individuals begin to doubt their own perceptions and memories. Beyond the psychological suffering, the brain also undergoes physical changes. Neuroimaging studies reveal that prolonged social isolation reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and empathy. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. This imbalance creates a cycle of hypervigilance and emotional instability. People become more prone to anger, fear, and paranoia, yet less capable of rational thought. In other words, the brain starts treating isolation as a survival threat, even when there's no physical danger present. Kupers observed this pattern repeatedly in prisons, where inmates in solitary confinement often exhibit symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's not limited to prisons. The same psychological effects can occur in anyone deprived of meaningful social contact. Whether it's an elderly person living alone, a child isolated by neglect, or someone working remotely with minimal human interaction. The context may differ, but the brain's reaction remains the same. It starts to deteriorate under the weight of loneliness. Loneliness, in psychological terms, isn't just the absence of company. It's the perception of being disconnected from others. That's why someone surrounded by people can still feel lonely, while another person living alone may not. But when physical isolation combines with emotional loneliness, the damage multiplies. Research shows that chronic loneliness increases the risk of cognitive decline, dementia, and even premature death. It affects the immune system, raises blood pressure, and triggers inflammation throughout the body. In essence, loneliness behaves like a chronic illness, invisible but deeply destructive. Kupers' insights help explain why solitary confinement is often described as psychological torture. When the brain is cut off from human contact, it's as if it begins to cannibalize itself. The neural circuits that thrive on communication and empathy weaken, while circuits related to fear and survival dominate. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The more isolated you are, the more anxious and distrustful you become, and the more difficult it is to reconnect when given the chance. To understand this further, let's look at real-world examples beyond the prison walls. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, millions of people experienced some degree of social isolation. Many reported symptoms of anxiety, irritability, and mental fatigue after only a few weeks. Children who lost daily contact with classmates showed reduced attention spans and emotional sensitivity. Elderly individuals living alone experienced sharper declines in memory and mood. These were temporary situations, yet they revealed how quickly the human mind begins to unravel without social nourishment. Even in studies with animals, the results are consistent. When mice are kept in isolation, their brains produce fewer synaptic connections, the communication links between neurons. Their behavior becomes erratic, and they show signs of depression. When reintroduced to social environments, recovery occurs, but not completely. Some effects linger, suggesting that prolonged isolation can leave lasting marks on brain structure and behavior. The same pattern appears in humans. Recovery is possible, but it takes time and sometimes professional help. Kupers emphasizes that one of the most powerful ways to heal from isolation is through what psychologists call re-socialization. This doesn't just mean being around people, it means meaningful interaction. genuine conversations, eye contact, empathy, and shared experiences. When people begin to reconnect, oxytocin and dopamine levels rise, stress hormones drop, and the brain slowly restores its balance. But re-entry can be difficult. After long isolation, many feel anxious or distrustful. They may crave connection, but fear it at the same time. This ambivalence is a psychological defense, the mind's way of protecting itself from further rejection or overstimulation. In severe cases, therapy becomes essential. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for instance, helps individuals identify and challenge distorted thoughts developed during isolation. Group therapy provides a safe space to relearn trust and social reciprocity. Kupers argues that these interventions are not luxuries, but necessities for recovery, especially for those who've endured prolonged solitary confinement or chronic loneliness. Another fascinating aspect of this topic is how isolation affects creativity and problem-solving. While short-term solitude can boost creativity by allowing uninterrupted thought, long-term isolation has the opposite effect. Without feedback, collaboration, or exposure to new ideas, creative thinking declines. The brain becomes rigid, repetitive, and less able to adapt. Kupers notes that this explains why isolated individuals often become trapped in cycles of repetitive behavior or obsessive thinking. The mind keeps looping through the same patterns without external input to break them. At the deepest level, the effects of isolation reveal something profound about human nature. Our minds are not designed to exist in isolation. Every emotion, thought, and behavior we experience is shaped by interaction with others. From infancy, our sense of self is built through mirrors, both literal and emotional. A baby learns who they are through their caregiver's expressions and tone. Adults, too, continue this exchange through friendships, love, work, and even casual encounters. Without these mirrors, identity itself begins to blur. Kupers describes how isolated prisoners often lose their sense of who they are, struggling to differentiate between reality and imagination. This is not weakness, it's biology. The brain requires feedback from others to remain stable, but there's hope. Just as isolation can damage the brain, connection can heal it. Even small social gestures, a phone call, a shared meal, a walk with a friend, activate neural circuits associated with joy and empathy. Over time, these experiences rebuild the brain's resilience. Kupers' work shows that the human mind, though vulnerable, is also remarkably adaptable. Recovery from isolation is possible, but it demands time, compassion, and consistent social nourishment. So what happens to your brain without any social contact? It begins to fade in clarity, lose stability, and drift into survival mode. But that same brain, given connection, can recover its strength. The message is simple yet profound. We are not meant to exist alone. Human contact isn't just pleasant, it's essential. It keeps our minds grounded, our emotions regulated, and our sense of reality intact.